Hello everyone, my name is Ross the Alcheminiaturist, and this is some horror. No wait, that's the wrong thing I'm showing. That is horror, but that's not what I'm showing you today. Today, we're converting a Centaurion Marshal. This Centaurion will be another addition to my Slaanesh army. I've been thinking, Slaanesh doesn't really have many, in my opinion, good models for mortals or mortal adjacent. They are all really just basic human shaped with some purple and gold in the original paint jobs. Slaanesh is supposed to be the embodiment of all things excess, and yet the only excessive part about them is their beauty. I want more. And that's when I got the idea. Why not go into body modifications, body horror, and horror in general? I follow a bunch of horror artists both on Twitter and Instagram. One that I follow, Omega Black, posted these two images with the title, "I fear that God is always watching me." When I saw them, I knew I needed to use them as inspiration for a conversion. The best model that I could see for this conversion is the Centaurion Marshal. It has a lot of points in its favor. Two of the major points are that it is large enough of a model that I can get a very good handle on it and show off more than I could with a smaller model. The other point in its favor is that its top and bottom halves are not together. I can assemble one part and not the other. This is amazing in my eyes, and so I started by building the bottom half of the model first. This model is, probably far and away, one of my favorite model kits. Mostly because of its price, but the sculpt is okay too, I guess. I kid. The sculpt is so crisp and clean. So much so that it has an ungodly amount of mold lines just to remind you that nothing is perfect and everything that I like with GW has to have some sort of flaw. As you can see, I try to cut out the parts of the model farther away from the nibs that hold the parts in place, to try to take all of the force and stress of the initial cuts and not give any sort of stress marks on the parts themselves. It causes a bit more mess to clean up, but it saves my peace of mind from any extra wear, tear, and breakage from the removal of the parts of the sprues. Now, I have a G-Dubs branded mold line remover that I paid about $30 for. Yes, 30 real life, why did I pay this dollars. Once the bottom horse part of the model was assembled, I then came to the part of the build I was sort of dreading. Making and getting a cross to look like it was both naturally and unnaturally part of the body. The natural part was the easiest choice. Use green stuff to make skin/flesh and blend it in as much as I could to be able to make it look as seamless as possible. The unnatural part was the hardest. How do I make a cross? Well, Omega Black's crosses both look wooden, so I should use wood. The local dollar store sells wooden dowels, and so I picked up a bunch of different sizes. If you ask me what size this one is, I don't know offhand. I threw them all into my wood box and threw away the packaging. I can say that they were probably the largest diameter-wise that they sold. I then stuck one end of the dowel into the Centaurion hole and penciled out where I wanted to cut. I grabbed my hand Dremel and saw attachment and cut it. I only measured once, as I only need to cut once. Do not do this. Measure like 3 times to make sure. I then did the same for the second piece, but made it a smaller length to make sure that the cross looked good and not super out of place. I have many problems with green stuff. None of them are the green stuff's fault itself. It's all because my mind brain tells me that I should be good at everything as soon as I start using it, and I do not like to accept that I have to learn and try and fail and get subpar results while learning and trying something new. I want to be great at everything now, not later, now. I have learned that using water to keep green stuff from sticking to everything I don't want it to is wrong. Hand cream is where it's at. I personally use Nivea hand lotion as it was what was both recommended to me as well as sent to me. I know I've said it before, but it's all because of Modern Synthesist that I have this and the knowledge. His tutorials on YouTube are, in my opinion, a national treasure, and I'm learning so much from them all. Once the green stuff had been molded and formed into what looks like skin growing into the cross, it was time to paint. But before I painted it, I put silly putty onto the wood part so that my AK's white primer would not get all over the wood. I would go on to put the model down for a while, and it decided that it wanted to stick more. But that's a problem for later in the video for me, not right now. Now is base building. For the base, I wanted to make sure that my base was a good representation of my overall thought mood for the model. So I first added 2 rocks taken from Drumheller and superglued them onto the base. Once they were dry, I added some Vellejo's water texture and let all of it cure overnight. More white primer was used to prime the entire base before I took a couple of browns for the rocks. Rhinox hide from Citadel was the first to go on, into more of the shaded areas and the visible bottoms of the rocks. Vellejo's Saddle Brown was added onto the more visible and thus lighter areas of the rocks, with a little accidental blending on the bigger of the two of them. Once I had finished with the rocks, I used Vellejo's Parasite Brown to paint the rest of the base and give it a more rocky, desert feeling. I then took Citadel's Blood Angels Red and painted all of the water texture with it, to simulate it being a lot of blood and gore, focusing more paint into the pool areas on the base. I then took out my dry brush and dry brushed some Pro Akryl's Bold Titanium White on some of the raised, ridgy areas to build up a bit of a highlight before I went on to blend some of the white with some Saddle Brown and dry brush that all over the top of the plain white areas. After the paints were dry, I took my water glue mixture and sprayed it all over the base and then dipped it into my sand container that I had from a previous Building Better Bases short. I have a playlist of all of them, plus a couple non-base shorts if you're looking for some ideas using more accessible and probably cheaper alternatives to buying and or printing basing materials and parts. And then, once the base was done, it was on to painting. I took my Rhinox hide and, with a little airbrush medium, shot it through the airbrush to give a more even coating. I tried hard not to get the paint on the metal parts, but also decided that the paints were opaque enough to cover anything that I got on there, so in the end, it wouldn't actually matter. I then took Saddle Brown for all of the straps. I mean, it seemed kind of appropriate to me. The hoof shoes and the saddle metal got Pro Akryl's Bright Gold, with Citadel's Leadbeltcher for the metal trim. The pincer, at the end of its tail, had Bold Titanium White for the claw parts, and the rest was Army Painter's Alien Purple. Although the purple acted more like a wash and less like a paint, so I left it like that. Like in a Building Better Bases short, I used Agrax Earthshade all over the wood cross to stain it. While it's not the most economical use of that shade, I still have yet to grab an interior wood stain, so this one would do for now. The last thing I did for the model was wash the metals in Nuln Oil and the rest of the body with Agrax Earthshade. Once the entire model was dry after shading, I dry brushed the body with saddle brown, and then Parasite brown, and then finally a small amount of bold titanium white to bring out a little bit of more highlight. And that's it, my brutal Centaurion Marshal. If you made it this far, why not toss me a sub and a like, and maybe even a comment with what you liked or any suggestions you have for me. As always, keep your brushes wet and your models painted. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.